So today, February 29th, is Rare Disease Day, and I live with an ultra-rare genetic bone disease called hypophosphatasia, and I've had 25 surgeries related to that disease. So, hey everybody, it's Aaron. Welcome back to my channel. I'm very excited to share this video today on Rare Disease Day because it's something that I'm very passionate about. It's not a secret, hopefully, to anybody that I live with this ultra-rare genetic metabolic bone disease called hypophosphatasia, because I talk about it a lot. It's part of the work that I do and sharing and hoping to help others and educate people in the community. So I'm very vocal about it. I'm not shy about it, but it's also really cool and, exciting to be able to share today, because today is not just about the disease that I live with. It's about the rare disease community as a whole and uplifting our community and continue to raise awareness for the over 30 million people who have rare diseases here in the United States. So, like I said, I live with hypophosphatasia. This is a rare genetic bone disease, a metabolic bone disease. And just a little bit about my story with that is that I was diagnosed with this disease in 2017, but I was born with symptoms of the disease from birth. So there were always signs from when I was born up until my diagnosis. It's just what's common in the rare disease community that you'll find is that it's very hard to get a diagnosis because these diseases are so rare. So there's not many doctors, physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs, like the whole healthcare community. There's not a lot of them that have seen these diseases. When I was diagnosed, my medical geneticist, who trained out of state at a very well-respected institution, said, he was like, I've never seen a case of this. I've never been referred a case of this to even do the testing on. And I hear that a lot. I hear that from all of my doctors locally that I see that treat some of the symptoms of my disease, where they're saying that we've maybe heard this in med school, we maybe have seen this somewhere, but never actually seen a patient. So that's very common in the rare disease community. But again, it took me till I was 25 years old to 2017 to get diagnosed, and that was after I'd had at least 10 surgeries related, like bone related, muscle related surgeries that we now know were caused by my disease. So it took a really long time. And another, what I think is interesting and people think interesting, is that I actually came up with the diagnosis myself. And I've shared this story before, but when I was 18, I was told my hips were going bad. And then when I was 20, I had my hips replaced. And they thought that this was related to prednisone use, which I did use a low dose of prednisone for a couple of months to treat Crohn's disease, which I have. And so they just kind of said that could be a side effect, even though they thought it was weird and thought it was weird that I had only been on prednisone for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden my bones were pretty much destroyed. And so, but what happened was when I was working on my master's in 2016, I dislocated one of my hips, had to have my hips replaced again. And that was kind of the breaking point for me, where I was like, I think something is wrong. There's no way that there's nothing else going on that would have caused my hips to dislocate only after 4 years after having them replaced. So I came up with the diagnosis, took a few months, talked to my doctor, who was great, referred me out, and I was right. And honestly, that's common in the rare disease community too. Patients get to a breaking point and they know that something's wrong. We know our bodies better than anybody else. We have to trust our guts in that regard. And so we push and we push, and eventually we either get the diagnosis ourselves or push for something and push, and then you get the diagnosis. So I've had 25 surgeries related to this disease. Hypophosphatasia doesn't allow my body to make an enzyme, or enough of an enzyme, that is important for bone health and bone mineralization. So then I get weak bones and muscle problems and nerve problems, and I've had problems with my kidneys, and so it's a whole thing. But again, that's just a little my story of living with the rare disease and why I'm talking today, but I don't want to completely focus on that. I do want to focus on Rare Disease Day and the rare disease community as a whole, because that's what this day is about. So, if you're not familiar, Rare Disease Day happens every year. It's usually on the last day of February, so often, unless it's a year like this, a leap year, it happens on the 28th, but it's on the 29th this year, which is really cool because it's a leap year. So it happens every year. And it's really just a day of advocacy and awareness for rare disease patients. So for the rare disease community as a whole. And there are a plethora of reasons why this is important. Some of them relate to what I went through. So awareness of the disease. I could have been diagnosed a long time prior if, if the medical team that I was with had, picked up on a couple of things. And again, I don't blame them. The disease is very rare. They've never seen a patient with it. And so it's not completely like on that. I think there's an overall issue with the system and rare diseases, and that's a whole other thing. But again, there's so many things that the community faces, and getting access to care and diagnosis and all that is a really big part of today. But again, the rare disease community as a whole, probably the most resilient community I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with and being part of, and talking to other people who live not with the disease that I have, but different rare diseases and their experiences. And so today is for that. It is to uplift the community, the patients who go through some of the honestly like craziest diagnostic journeys oftentimes to get to where they're at, or sometimes there are things where it's very prominent that there's something wrong, but it still can take many years to get a diagnosis, and it's a whirlwind of a process. And so the rare disease community, though, there's a lot of support that's needed. There's a lot of support from others, the community, physicians, and the healthcare community, the nurses, and all of those involved in the care. For me, the physical therapists that are involved, the surgeons that are involved, the neurologists that are involved, like all of this care team that we have to see. There's so much support that's needed, and it's a multifaceted way to support a patient, right? But there are so many things that the rare disease community faces that we still need help with. But what I want to talk about, some of the overall issues and things that we see and things that occur that need change, and there are important, statistical facts about that as well. So I've talked about this recently, and one thing that really hits home with me is that 95% of all rare diseases, so there are more than 7,000 known rare diseases, right? And 95% of those do not have a treatment. There is no approved treatment specifically for that disease. So that means that you're treating the symptoms, the side effects of the disease, and there's a lot of support that can be done in that area, but you're not actually treating the disease itself. And this means you're not changing the course of that disease. You're not really slowing the progression of it. It's still going to occur. It's still going to progress, but you don't have a treatment for it. So there's nothing you can really do but support the person, the patient, and try to get them through the things that they experience in that moment, and whether that's pain or broken bones or some neurodevelopment issues. So there are 95% that don't have a treatment, and it's so hard for me to imagine being diagnosed with a very serious chronic disease that has no cure, and then being also told that there is no treatment. We can, help in other ways, but there is no actual treatment for that disease. And the other thing is that 70% of rare diseases start in childhood and are shown in childhood, and where they show symptoms in childhood. And so to be diagnosed as a child and to have to tell a parent, I'm a parent, I have 3 children. So to have to tell a parent that we've diagnosed your child with this disease. However, there is no treatment. We will kind of support you and treat the symptoms as best we can. And that's kind of it, that's not really it. There are a lot of things that have to be done. There's a lot of follow-up. But I mean, to know that you have a disease that has no treatment is just, it's hard for me to process. I'm lucky in the lucky 5% of rare diseases that does have a treatment. It was less than 10 years ago that it was approved, but there is a treatment, and it does help. It does slow the progression of my disease, albeit there's a lot that I still deal with, but it has slowed that down, which is great. And so these are things that the community faces. There are no treatments. And then there are things that I mentioned a little earlier, access to care, right? So this is a big one. And not just access, it's access to the appropriate doctors, access to the appropriate tests that you need, and then just access to affordable healthcare, affordable care. So rare disease patients live with very rare diseases, right? That means that there are not a lot of physicians, people in usually wherever area you live, sometimes the whole country you live in, that are familiar with your disease. So you sometimes have to travel for care. That's expensive. But to get the best care, that's sometimes what we have to do. I have to do that. I live in Mississippi and I was diagnosed here, yes, but all my physicians, even at the teaching hospital that I was diagnosed at, everybody was like, we've never seen this. We don't necessarily feel comfortable treating you. We'll help coordinate your care, but we think you need to see somebody else. So I travel out of state. I travel 6 hours a couple times a year to see a doctor at Vanderbilt who's incredible. Was the best thing I've ever done for my own disease treatment. But that is something that I have to do, and that's something that's very common in the community, right? And then if there is a treatment, if you have a treatment like me, access to that treatment can be very difficult. They're often very expensive. You have to fight insurance and all these other things. And so a lot of patients can't afford it. That's the truth of the matter. And so there's so many things like that need to be addressed and need to continue focused on. But awareness is a big part of that, right? Raising awareness for rare diseases, the community, the issues that we face is one of the best ways to make sure that there's continued interest from whether that's industry partners, leaders, whether that's the research, the science, the funding, federal funding, state funding for research. And that's how we get to treatments, right? The awareness, the funding, the research, that's what is how we continue to push forward to change the landscape for rare diseases. So raising awareness is important. Advocating is important. These are things that Rare Disease Day tries to address. And it's important for us to share our stories, and it's important to continue to push for change, continue to make sure that the rare disease community is supported, that they have what they need, but also that their stories are heard, that their voice is heard, that there is a continued push for the next level of care and advances in these diseases. It's tough. That's things that we kind of focus on, but the truth of the matter from my own perspective is it's challenging. It's so hard to not only have to fight for our own care. I had to come up with a diagnosis myself because I knew something was wrong. I knew that this should not be happening when it was happening. And so I had to do that for myself, and a lot of patients have to do that. And then it's challenging to continue to be that advocate for yourself and be the voice for yourself while also trying to share your story and make sure that people know about it, and so that there's continued interest and awareness and research and all of these things that we discussed a second ago. It is challenging, and Rare Disease Day tries to address that, and there's so many things that go on during this week. There's Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, where there are advocates, patients out there advocating with their state, federal lawmakers to pass policies that help rare disease patients. And then there are these awareness and advocacy efforts that we kind of go through and do and can try to continue to make sure that we are heard, that our voices are heard, that the rare disease community is not an afterthought. And I think there are oftentimes when we're in our own little disease communities, because it's rare disease, right? There's oftentimes not a lot of people that are diagnosed with your disease. So it's a small community, and it oftentimes feels like maybe we're an afterthought. Why would there be interest in a small community of people who are affected by a disease that is pretty terrible, but there's not a lot of patients? So how do we continue to make sure that we're not an afterthought? And Rare Disease Day is part of that. And while it's not focused on one specific disease, it is focused on the rare disease community as a whole. And there's a lot of us. There's over 7,000 rare diseases out there, right? And I think there's over 30 million people in the United States that are diagnosed with a rare condition. And so there's a lot of us as a whole, and we can continue to make sure that the rare disease community is not an afterthought. And that's by sharing our stories and making our voices heard. And so that's what today is about. It's about that. And I am so, grateful and honored to be part of the rare disease community, the most resilient community I've ever been part of, because we have to go through so much. And it's genuinely an honor to share my story today and to hopefully raise awareness and for not just my disease, but for our community as a whole, so that we can achieve those things. We can achieve the continued awareness. We can achieve the continued support and even financial support that funds the research, that we continue to push for the 95% of patient diseases and patients who don't have a treatment. We continue to make sure that that is something that is actively thought of, actively worked on, and that we get to a point where we say 95% of rare diseases have a treatment, and that maybe there's 5% that don't. We need that number to flip-flop. And that's a hard challenge to meet when there are so many diseases that are very complicated. Rare diseases, a lot of rare diseases have a huge genetic component to it, and treating a genetic disease can be very challenging. And so there are a lot of hurdles, but that doesn't mean we stop. That doesn't mean we hit one hurdle and we're like, okay, well, maybe we're never going to get to a treatment. That's not how we win this war of rare diseases, and that's not how we get to these treatments. We continue to push, we continue to advocate, we raise awareness, and we share our stories, and we hopefully incite some piece of change that we just continue to make sure that we're not an afterthought. So I hope that you will help us today, the rare disease community. If you're a rare disease patient, share your story. I would love to hear it. Share it in the comments. Share it with the world. Yeah, I believe everybody has a story to tell. It doesn't matter if you share your story all the time or not. I believe that everybody has a story to tell, and it's important to tell it. And so I hope that you'll share your story. That could be whether you're a caregiver. Like I said, 70% of these diseases start in childhood, which means there are a lot of parents out there who are rare parents, who are just fighting for their kids and fighting for literally their children's lives and their treatments. So if you're a caregiver, those are some of the most impactful stories in my opinion. But if you're a caregiver, you're a rare disease patient, I would love to hear your story. I would love for you to share it. But if you're not, if you don't fall into any of that, I hope that you find that, that you've learned something, that you find that you have the passion now to maybe help us raise awareness, to get involved in our community, because we'd love to share our story. We love for people to learn about our diseases. And that, again, that's that education part, that awareness part, that's part of it. So I hope that you found this helpful, that you found this impactful. I hope that you'll share your story on Rare Disease Day and interact and ask questions if you have questions. And if there's anything I can do to support you, please let me know. But happy Rare Disease Awareness Day. I hope that you find the support that you need, that you share your story, and that we continue to push, not just today, but every single day, for change, for healthcare change, for all chronic diseases, but especially rare diseases. So I hope that you'll continue with me throughout the year as we continue to raise awareness for this amazing, resilient community that is, again, one of the greatest communities I've ever been a part of. So with that being said, happy Rare Disease Day. Please let me know if I can do anything for you, and thank you for watching this video.